Hello, advanced social psychology students. Welcome to Unit 1, Module 5, Chapter 4, Attitudes, Behavior, and Persuasion. So let me call up the PowerPoint slides for this week's lecture video. And this week's lecture video is going to be a little bit shorter than some of the other ones, only because I think your textbook did a phenomenal job with this chapter, and it's very straightforward. So I don't want to waste your time in having you listen to me say everything that's in the textbook when you can read the textbook and understand. In many of the other chapters, some of the material in the chapter is much more relevant than others. So in the video, I'm giving you like the main pieces of information that I want you to know. But this chapter is just chock full with tons of great information. So I really want you to know everything that's in the textbook. I'm going to highlight some things only because I really want to make sure you understand these things, but really your time is well spent carefully reading the textbook for this chapter 4. And I'll spend less time of my sort of going through some things, but there are some things I want you to know. So just in case you're watching this before you read the textbook, to remind you of what we're talking about with attitudes, I use this slide in my undergraduate social psychology class, where we say they're the ABCs of attitudes, these 3 attitudinal components. It's not perfect because sometimes when we say attitudes, we mean just the affective and the cognitive. Sometimes we mean just the affective. Sometimes we mean just the cognitive. Sometimes we mean all 3. So it's kind of a murky term some of the time. But we can think of attitudes as having these 3 different components. One is the affective or the feeling or the emotional component. If we're going to measure the affective component of attitudes, we might use your heart rate. So like, what is your attitude toward this man? Well, if I show you a picture of him, does your heart rate increase? If so, then you seem to have either really positive feelings toward him or you want to rip his head off, right? But we can see that you have a strong attitude toward him. There's a big, strong feeling component toward him. Oftentimes when we're measuring someone's feelings, the affective component of an attitude, we'll use a scale. So on a scale of 1 to 7, how positively do you feel toward ice cream? 1 to 7. 1, no positive feelings at all. 7, very positive feelings, as much positive as possible, or something like that. We can look at the behavioral aspect of an attitude by looking at their actions. How much money does a person spend on ice cream? Gives you an idea of how positive their attitude toward ice cream is. How much time does a person spend with another person? Gives you an idea of how much they care about that person that they're spending a lot of time with, right? And then the cognitive component is our thoughts. What are our thoughts toward this particular topic? That's the third part of the attitude. And what we might do is ask someone to write a paragraph about ice cream. And then we can code what they're writing for positive thoughts, negative thoughts. What are their thoughts about it? Okay, so in this, I'm sort of giving you an idea of how we measure attitudes, how attitudes can be split into these different components, and so on. Now, whenever we are trying to understand someone's attitudes towards something, especially sometimes we're trying to predict their behavior from it, okay? In fact, oftentimes we're looking at someone's thoughts and feelings, the affective and cognitive component, and we're trying to see, is that a good predictor? When will it predict behavior? And surprisingly, our affective, our feelings and thoughts are not always good predictors of our behavior. There's a really important theory. It's called the theory of planned behavior. It was created by Agen and Fishbein quite a while ago, but it is fundamental. If you've had a course in a graduate level course in social psychology, people are going to expect that you know this theory. So it's very fundamental. So I want to make sure that you really understand this well. Okay. And the point of the theory is to try to determine what leads someone to behave a certain way, correct? Like, how can I predict someone's behavior? And from not in emergency situations, but in regular, ordinary situations, before we execute a behavior, we usually have an intention to execute that behavior. So if I want to exercise, I have an intent. If I'm exercising, I probably had an intention to exercise before I actually showed up in the gym. There was something where I went, I want to exercise today, and then I actually exercised. Does that make sense? Well, what leads to this intention to behave a certain way? And so, Ajahn and Fishbein, they say it's your attitude, and by attitude here, they mean your thoughts and feelings. Subjective norms, this is your belief about what the people around you think and feel about this. And then your perceived behavioral control. How much control do you think you have over your behavior? So let's go through these. One of the reasons why this theory is just so loved, I don't know if that's the right word, but so prominent and discussed a lot, is because there's so much evidence to support it. It's very evidence-based theory, and it's been used to try to predict marijuana use, whether or not someone voted in an election, how much someone drinks alcohol, exercise, use of condoms, especially during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. This theory was used a lot. Now, you might be wondering where this dotted line comes from. In Ashbin and Fishbein's original theory, this dotted line was not there, okay? But the research is clear that perceived behavioral control actually has a direct effect on behavior, not just an effect through intention or through subjective norms and intention or through attitudes and intention and behavior. So this one, when we talk about the theory now, we include a line here. I made it dotted. I made the line dotted so that I could teach you that that wasn't part of the original theory. But you should, you can, now that you know that, you can make that a solid line and go, okay, this is the theory that the research backs up. So let's use condom use because, boy, there's so many articles done on this. So you were looking to see, did someone actually use a condom when they were having sex? So before, we're going to ask, did they use it? Well, to know that, one of the best predictors is, did they intend to use it? Now, it's not a perfect predictor. Many of us think if someone has an intention of doing something, they'll definitely do it, but it's not true. So when you asked, especially in the 80s, in the height of the AIDS epidemic, when they asked homosexual men, do you intend to wear a condom when you're having sex? It was almost like 99, 100% of the men were like, yes. But then it's like, in your last 3 encounters, did you? Or they'd ask people a week later, so did you? And they go, no, I didn't. And so the relationship between intention and behavior is very strong, but it's not perfect. There are times where, even though we intend to do something, we don't actually do it. Now, but if you intend to do it, you're definitely more likely to do it. If we ask someone, what's your intention to use a condom? And they said, I have no intention to. Do you intend to wear a condom? No. Well, then did they wear one? No, right? So intention is a pretty good predictor of behavior, but it's not as perfect as we might think. Okay, now what leads to the intention? One thing that leads to the intention is your attitude, your feelings, and your thoughts about the topic. So I could give you a lot of statistics and really good information about condoms that might make you change your attitude toward condoms, so now you're more positive toward wearing them. Okay, I could also have you watch a video or something about a man who had a sexual encounter that didn't use a condom and ended up with AIDS and is now dying, and how his partner feels so guilty. And this might change your feelings toward using a condom. So I could look at change by giving you information to change your thoughts, giving you information to change your feelings. I can change your attitude about something, which would change your intention to do the behavior and make it more likely, in this case, for you to wear condoms. Your attitude will also affect your subjective norms and your perceived behavioral control. Okay, let's talk about subjective norms next. So subjective norms are the what you believe the people around you attitude toward this is. Okay. So the group of people that you're around, what is their attitude toward condoms? If they all think using condoms is super important, then you're more likely to think, you're more likely to have the attitudes that using condoms is important, and you're more likely to have the intention to use a condom. Does that kind of make sense? One of the best examples I have of the subjective norm is like my attitude of eating. So let's say I'm like, do I want to eat a lot of food and next time I eat dinner? Well, some of it is going to have to do with the subjective norms of the people who are sitting at the dining room table around me, right? If everyone around me is sitting there eating huge plates of pasta and lasagna and ice cream, it's going to be a lot harder for me to be sitting there having a salad. Does that kind of make sense? If everyone around me at the table, however, is thin and eating salads and stop when they're halfway done with their food, then it's going to be a lot easier for me to do the same thing. Does that make sense? So subjective norms are the attitudes of the people around you. But I'm saying that that's not exactly accurate. It's what you think the attitudes are of the people around you. So it doesn't matter, like, if I think everyone around me thinks it's okay not to use a condom when having homosexual sex, if it doesn't matter if a researcher goes and interviews those people and they all think it's important. What matters is, does that person think that everyone around them thinks that it's okay? That kind of makes sense. So subjective norms are the person who's going to decide whether to intend to do this behavior. What do they perceive the people around them's attitudes are toward the behavior? Okay. And our subjective norms affect our attitudes. Our subjective norms affect our perceived behavioral control, or they can. Our subjective norms very much affect our intention, which then affects our behavior. And the last one, this one is sort of common sense, your perceived behavioral control. I may have a positive attitude toward wearing condoms. I might have subjective norms that it's a good thing to wear a condom. But if I don't know where I'm going to buy the condoms, I don't have access to them, then my perceived behavioral control is low, and my intention of using a condom is going to be lower, and the likelihood of me using a condom is going to be lower. Does that kind of make sense? If I'm trying to see if I'm going to overeat, if my attitude toward overeating is very negative, if the subjective norms are that everyone around me doesn't want to overeat and don't overeat, but my behavioral control is I'm sitting there with I sort of have this feeling that I just can't control myself. I don't have this trigger that says I'm full, and actually when I overeat, it kind of feels good. So I don't trust that I have behavioral control to stop eating. Does that kind of make sense? Then I'm probably not, my intention to not overeat is not going to be as strong. And that makes me less likely to not overeat. And just the perceived behavioral control, I'm not going to be able to control myself around food, means I'm probably going to overeat. And our perceived behavioral control can change our norms or our subjective norms and our attitude. Does that make sense? So I hope you see how useful this theory is in trying to understand people's behavior. It becomes less clear on how to explain it when all of these are positive and their intention is positive, but then they don't do it. Does that kind of make sense? So you have a positive attitude of exercising today. You think it's important. You're going to do it. All the people around you exercise daily and they're encouraging you to exercise and they think exercise is great. And you have access to a gym and access to your sneakers and you have a car to drive there. You have an intention that you're definitely going to go and exercise. But at the end of the day, you go to bed and you never did. So that we kind of have a hard time explaining. But more often than not, if all of these things are positive, and your intention is positive, then you're way more likely to exercise than if you have an attitude of it's not important to exercise. Or if people in your circle go, you don't need to exercise, that's just a waste of time. Work instead. You should be working, you should be studying, or have a drink with us. Let's Have fun with your friends. That's more important than exercising. Or if you feel like these sneakers don't really fit, or it's going to be hard to get to the gym, or when I get to the gym, I'm not going to feel comfortable. So I don't feel like I have control over my exercise behavior. You could see how that's going to make it less likely for you to intend to exercise and less likely for you to actually exercise. Okay, so that's the theory of planned behavior. Now, you can see that the theory of planned behavior looks at how much your attitudes end up affecting your intention to behave and your behavior. A lot of what we do in psychology is we're interested in how can we change someone's behavior, right? How can we change someone's attitude so that we can change their behavior? And probably the most popular researcher who's looked at attitude change is Cialdini, and his work is phenomenal. And he's got a great book that's a layperson's book that I highly recommend. I know right now in the middle of a semester, you're probably swamped, but over the next break that we have, I recommend you reading his book called Influence, Science, and Practice. It's a paperback thin book, and now you can get it in Kindle, of course. It is such an easy book to read. And what's fascinating is by the time you're done with the book, he has discussed nearly every classic study in psychology. And so not only is it a great book to understand attitude change, but it's a great book to read to remind you of all of the classic studies in psychology. Not all of them, but a bunch of them. He finds a way of talking in very everyday language that, you know, your very smart 15-year-old daughter could completely understand, or your mom could completely understand, or your spouse could easily understand in a very easy to read, very easy to understand. But he really goes through all of these classic studies in psychology and really goes through how important these 6 processes are toward attitude change. And what he says is that these tend to be automatic. So sometimes they're even outside of your awareness. So for example, if a salesperson shows up to your house to try to sell you windows and they have a plate of cookies for you, or they give you something free. In our society, we have this norm of reciprocity where if they give you something, you're supposed to give them something. So you're actually more likely to buy their if they come giving you a free gift. So how can the salesperson then use that to make it more likely for them to get a sale? So if you end up spending $2,000 to get a new roof because they brought you a plate of $5 cookies, you know, they made out. And you might not even be aware when they come with cookies that now this makes it more likely for you to buy their product. Does that kind of make sense? And I should probably step back and give you a little backstory. Cialdini was a professor at the University of Arizona, and and he was really interested in attitude and attitude change, had done a bunch of research. And he said one day he just looked and said, I'm barely changing people's attitudes at all. On a 1 to 7 Likert scale, I can get them to go from like a 4 to a 4.5. And he said that he was on campus on a weekend and came outside and saw all of the people in super hot weather, thrilled about going to a football game, a big football game. And he goes, you know, these are some strong, passionate attitudes. I feel like I'm missing the point here. So he took a sabbatical and he said, who are the attitude change or the persuasion experts of our time? And he said, salespeople. So he, on sabbatical, went through every salesperson training that he could find. So he was trained how to, you know, do air conditioning, sell air purifiers, roofs, windows, insurance. I mean, just everything you can imagine. And he noticed that in a bunch of these sales training techniques or sales training workshops, there were certain techniques that they all had in common. And these 6 were definitely some of them. And then he brought them back to the lab and he started studying them. And all 6 of these have been empirically tested over and over again. So we know these really do lead to attitude change. So rather than me going through the 6 of these, I've clipped a link or I've posted a link where Cialdini is talking about them himself. So and they're talked about in your textbook also. So between the textbook and Cialdini's link, you're going to have a good idea of attitude change. Okay, another huge model that helps us understand attitude change is the elaboration likelihood model. This is done by Petty and Cacioppo. This model is so important that when, again, if you've even had an undergraduate class in social psychology, people are going to expect that you know what's about this model. So definitely having had a graduate level course in it, people are going to expect you know it. When I went to do, when I was getting my PhD in social psychology, you go through a comprehensive exam. And for us, they had us sit in a room for 8 hours. You'd have 4 hours, you brought your lunch and you were in this small little room and you sat for 4 hours in the morning and they gave you 4 questions. So you had about an hour per question. Then they gave you a break where you could eat, but you had to still be in the room. Then they, in the afternoon, gave you 4 more questions for the 4 remaining hours. And again, you'd answer those. So you basically had 8 questions where they were trying to make sure that you understood all the areas of social psychology as much as you needed to for them to allow you to continue and do your dissertation and earn the PhD. And one of the 8 questions on my comps exam was discuss the elaboration likelihood model, what it is, how it was significant, come up with an experiment to test the model in an area that you're interested in, design the experiment and talk about its limitations. And so I was blown away. Luckily, I had looked it over, but I had no idea that it was going to be like one of the 8 most critical things for me to know. So, and granted, I got the PhD a long time ago. It was like 1987. I probably took comps in like 1985. So I know that that was a long, long time ago. But still, elaboration likelihood model is seen as very important. So I do want you to know this. So you're going to see when you read the textbook that there are so many different factors that end up affecting persuasion. Everything from characteristics of the person who's giving the message, like how credible they are, how likable they are, how physically attractive they are. Things about the message itself. Did you hear it first or last? Was it written or was it something that you heard on TV? To how much of an emotional appeal it had, or was it more logical? There's all these different factors that end up affecting persuasion. So many so that Petty and Cacioppo said there can't just be one thing that's affecting persuasion because it's just all over the place. And so they came up with their theory where they believe there are 2 different routes or 2 different processes that lead to persuasion. They name one the central route and one the peripheral route. Now, before I go into what happens on each route, I want you to know when they predict that people are likely to use their central route versus their peripheral route. And I like the way they use route rather than process, because when I think of a route, I think of a road. And what they believe is that when you're processing a persuasion attempt, you're either going to use your central route or your peripheral route. You can't go halfway down and then hop routes. So like when I drive to Cameron's campus from my house, I can take Gore Boulevard or Rogers Lane and then Sheridan, but I can't take, if I'm halfway down Gore, I can't go, ooh, I wish I took Rogers Lane and end up on Rogers Lane. Once you start on a route, you finish that route. Now, you might have a different persuasion attempt in the future, and then you can use a different route. But once you're on a route, you're on a route. What Petty and Cacioppo say is that we are exposed to so many messages that are trying to persuade us, that are trying to have us have a certain attitude, certain feelings or thoughts, trying to change our behavior in some way, that we can't attend to all of them. And so they believe for topics that are important to us, for topics that are personally relevant to us, we're going to use our central route. But for all the other topics, we're just going to use a peripheral route that takes a lot less of our cognitive energy. Okay, so for a topic that's really important to us or personally relevant to us, we're going to go through the cognitive work of using our central route. But for everything else, for a topic that's not important, it's not personally relevant, we're just going to use our peripheral root. Now, what happens if we're using the central root? They call the central root the rational root. And when someone's using their central root to process a persuasion attempt, all that's going to matter is the message. They're going to look at how strong the message is, how consistent the message is, how logical the message is. And if that message is strong and logical and consistent, the person will be persuaded. And if it's not, they won't be. So here in college, especially as an undergraduate, we spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours at getting you to be really good at writing a logical, consistent, strong persuasion attempt that would be able to take someone who is using their central root and persuade them really well. Does that kind of make sense? Spend a lot of time on that because learning how to write a strong, logical, consistent argument is important to convince people who are using their central root. Okay. However, most of the time, the topics are not personally relevant. They're not super important to us, and we're not even using our central root. And when we're using our peripheral root to process a persuasion attempt, the message doesn't matter at all. So all that work that we put you through so that you'd be good at writing them, if you're trying to persuade someone, not just write them, speak them and everything else, but if you are trying to persuade someone who's using their heuristic root, their peripheral root, all that is just a complete waste of your time and energy to write something that's logical and consistent and strong, because they're not even going to be looking at the message. They're just going to be focused on the superficial cues that surround the message. Okay. And if the cues are emotionally arousing, they make the person feel afraid, or they make the person feel really good and joyful, then persuasion will occur. If they're flat and boring, no persuasion will occur. Okay. So that is the elaboration likelihood model, and it can explain why so many different things can lead to persuasion in so many different areas. And it can almost seem inconsistent because it has to do with how much the audience member is involved in the issue and thinks it's personally relevant, to even whether they're going to be focused in on the message or focused in on stuff that has nothing to do with the message. And then if it does have something to do with the message, looking at how strong and logical and consistent it is. Okay. So it can be interesting if you know you're the messenger, if you're trying to persuade people, and you know that in the audience, some of the people, the topic is going to be highly relevant to them, personally relevant to them, and it's going to be important to them, and others could care less or couldn't care less. You're then somehow going to have to, at the same time, give a strong, consistent, logical message and have all the cues surrounding the message be really positive and uplifting and exciting. Or, you can induce fear. People they'll change their attitudes if they're afraid of something, right? So make them really afraid that if they don't have this attitude, their life as they know it, the world as we know it, is coming to an end, right? So how are you going to get both groups to it might be really hard to persuade both groups at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the elaboration likelihood model. There's another big model that that really comes down to how, or another way of thinking about it is how our behaviors sometimes end up affecting our attitudes. So far we've spent a lot of time talking about how your thoughts and feelings can influence your behavior, like with the theory of planned behavior, with the elaboration likelihood model. To some extent, your behavior, well, less so with the elaboration likelihood model. But now what we're going to talk about now is cognitive dissonance theory. And cognitive dissonance theory basically is going to say that your behavior sometimes ends up affecting your attitude, not the other way around. So when you looked at the self chapter, which was last week, One of the things that we touched on was self-perception theory by Bem. Remember, self-perception theory says that to know our attitude, we look at our behavior. We look at our behaviors to know what our thoughts and feelings are, just like I look at someone else's behavior to know what their thoughts and feelings are. That's self-perception theory. So that definitely says our behavior ends up affecting our attitude. Another theory that says the same thing is cognitive dissonance theory. Cognitive dissonance theory is a huge theory, not just in social psychology, but in psychology as general. In general, if you've had an undergraduate course in psychology, we'd expect you to know cognitive dissonance theory, much less have a MS, a Master's of Science in Behavioral Sciences on the general psychology track. You've got to know cognitive dissonance theory. Cognitive dissonance theory has leaked into, not leaked, it's a good thing it went, but it's affected in a whole bunch of different areas. So they talk about it in communication, they talk about it in business, they talk about it in advertising and marketing. It's talked about in a lot of different fields. I'm going to present to you the original paper written by Fessinger of what cognitive dissonance theory was. It's sort of like going back to its very, very basics. And this is still what we believe today. Okay. So basically, Fessinger said that he said that there are three basic propositions. He says inconsistency leads to unpleasant psychological tension. And actually, before I go into exactly what this is, let me go through this, then I'm going to go through an example. So he says inconsistency leads to unpleasant psychological tension. So in this case, we're going to talk about inconsistency between our thoughts and feelings and our behavior. So if your thoughts and feelings are that you should exercise and your behavior is you haven't exercised in a month, according to Bem, you are going to be in this unpleasant state of psychological tension that he calls dissonance. We're going to be like, we're dissonant. And his second proposition is that we can't go around feeling dissonant. If you're like, dissonant. No, the experience of this dissonance is associated with a motivation to reduce it. Just like when you're hungry, you can't just go around being hungry for a long, long time. It's associated with motivation to get food, right? If you have to go to the bathroom, you don't go, ooh, I have to go to the bathroom. It's associated with a motivation to go to the bathroom, right? So this experience of dissonance is associated with motivation to get rid of it. You are going to try to get rid of it. And he hypothesized that there were 5 ways to get rid of dissonance. We have experimental support for 4 of them. So I'm only going to hold you responsible for the first 4 of them. The last one you do not need to know. So one thing we can do is change our attitude to match our behavior. So one thing I could do is go, it's not that important for me to exercise right now. I'm really busy and other things are taking priority. I just had a new baby. I'm not going to exercise till the baby's 6 months old. You're going to change your attitude to match your behavior. Another thing you might do is change your perception of the behavior. Well, I walked from my car to my office. So I got a little bit of walking in, I'm going to call it. So I did exercise. Okay. You're going to add additional information to make the attitude and behavior match. Does that kind of make sense? Or you can reduce perceived choice. I wanted to exercise. I planned to exercise. I was given no choice, so I had no ability to exercise. You can kind of see how that's really similar to that perceived behavioral control. Okay. And the last one, minimize the importance of the conflict. Experimentally, it's hard to disassociate that from the other 4. It's not that we don't believe it's true. We just can't support it. So the example that I'm going to give is, let's say that I want to be on a diet. Okay, so let's say my attitude is, my thoughts and feelings are that I want to lose weight. So I want to eat more healthy. I want my diet to improve, and that includes not eating ice cream. Okay, and my subjective norms might be most people around me believe it's important to eat healthy, especially at my age, where being obese at this point could mean that you're going to live less long and have heart disease issues. And my perceived behavioral control might be, I get to control what goes in my mouth. I get to control what I eat and what I don't eat. So all three of these lead to my intention to eat healthy and to not eat ice cream. And that should lead to my behavior of me eating salads and protein and good fruits and vegetables and healthy foods for me. And ice cream, not so much. Does that kind of make sense? So that's how life should work. But let's say last night I polished off an entire pint of ice cream. Went to my freezer, got a pint of cookies and cream, and ate the entire thing in one sitting. So I had this attitude. My thoughts and feelings are that I want to be on a diet. I want to eat healthy. Ice cream isn't healthy. I don't want to be eating ice cream. That's my attitude. But my behavior is I just ate an entire pint of ice cream. According to Fessinger, this inconsistency between my thoughts and feelings and my behavior is going to put me in the state of dissonance. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I just ate a whole thing of ice cream and I wanted to be on a diet and I wanted to be eating healthy and I wanted to live a long time. This experience of dissonance is going to be associated with, I got to get rid of this dissonance. I can't go to sleep like this. I'm all anxious. Dissonance, it's psychological tension. It's unpleasant, but it's a form of arousal, right? So I need to get rid of it. I want to have peace. I want to lower my arousal level. So I need to get rid of this dissonance. Well, one way I can get rid of it is to change my attitude. My weight is fine. I've been this weight for a long time. It is what it is. I'm fine at the weight I am. I don't need to diet. I don't need to eat more healthy. My attitude is it's fine for me to eat what I want. After all, I might only live for another 15 years. I want to enjoy every little bite of anything that tastes good. And, who cares? Quality rather than quantity. I'd rather live shorter and eat things that taste great. Okay, so that's changing my attitude to match my behavior. And you can see how that will totally get rid of any dissonance I have. It's fine that I ate a pint of ice cream. In fact, I could do it again right now if I wanted to, because I'm going to enjoy life and enjoy food, because I don't have the attitude of I need to eat healthy anymore. I'm taking that off. I'm not going to worry about that. Does that make sense? This can work really well for attitudes that do not are not super strong attitudes, thoughts, and feelings that don't define who you are. It's really easy to just change your attitude. It's going to be the easiest way to get rid of dissonance. Okay. But another thing you have at your disposal, another way you could go is to change your perception of the behavior. And we're going to be more likely to do one of these later ones if that attitude is important to us. Okay, so let's say you read a whole bunch of books about healthy lifespan and all this kind of stuff, and you know that eating healthy really will improve not only the length of your life, but the quality of your life. And so you're not going to be able to just say, I don't care, I don't need to be on a diet. Like you really do want to lose weight. This attitude is really important to you. So that first one of changing your attitude isn't an option. What you might do is change your perception of the behavior and say something like, well, I only ate a pint of ice cream. It's not like I ate a quart. Or I've had a pint this week. As long as I don't eat ice cream again, that's not that much ice cream. In fact, if I don't have ice cream for the whole month, a pint of ice cream in a month isn't bad at all. See how I'm changing the perception of the behavior. Yes, I had a pint of ice cream, but the pint of ice cream isn't that much ice cream really, so it stays in line with my attitude of I'm on a diet, I want to eat healthy. I can make these things line up by changing my perception of the behavior to match the attitude. I can't change the behavior because I've already done the behavior. If I could change the behavior, I wouldn't be in cognitive dissonance. Remember, we're only in cognitive dissonance because we've done the behavior that was inconsistent with our attitude. So if you could change the behavior, then you wouldn't have been in dissonance in the first place, and this theory wouldn't even apply. Does that make sense? So you've already done the behavior that's inconsistent with your attitude. One thing you can do is change the perception of the behavior to make it seem more in line. A third thing you could do is add consonant cognitions, add new information that make the attitude and the behavior match. So an example here might be, well, ice cream, when you're on a diet, it's really important to have a lot of dairy to make sure that you're getting enough protein, and dairy is good for you. Eating dairy is healthy, and ice cream is dairy. So when I ate that ice cream, it was healthy. And so you can see here, I'm adding new information about the ice cream that now makes the attitude and the behavior match. And the last one, my personal favorite, is reduce perceived choice. And so I might say something like, you know what, my husband bought me that, came home that night from work and bought me that pint of ice cream and came home and said, you've seemed really bummed lately. So I brought you ice cream because I know that always puts you in a great mood. And what kind of a wife would I be if I put that in the freezer and didn't eat it? I had to eat the entire thing in one sitting to be a good wife and show him how much I appreciated his thoughtfulness of going to get me the ice cream. Does that make sense? Now I've made it like I didn't have a choice but to do that behavior. And so now my behavior matches my attitude. Make sense? We can go through another example. It may not be as good, but your attitude is, my attitude certainly is that drunk driving is not okay. It's very dangerous, terrible. It's something that I should never, ever, ever do. Let's say, however, I did drink alcohol and I did get behind a wheel and I did get home. Now, all of a sudden, I'm like, my attitude is drunk driving is absolutely wrong. And my behavior is I just drove even though I had had some alcohol. According to cognitive dissonance theory, I'm going to be in this negative state of arousal, in this dissonance. And this is going to be associated with me reducing my dissonance. I'm going to seek out ways to get rid of it. So what could I do? Change my attitude and say drunk driving is okay. Well, that's probably unlikely. I mean, my attitude toward that is really strong. Subjective norms of, we've got laws against it. I mean, I'm probably going to keep my attitude, so that's not possible. Change our perception of the behavior. I could say, well, I wasn't drunk driving. I was just a little buzzed. And you could see commercials that are out there where they go buzzed or drinking while you're buzzed is drunk driving. Because most of us do believe drunk driving is wrong. They're helping us not change the perception of our behavior to make it okay. Does that make sense? I don't know how to add the consonant cognitions, but that reduced perceived choice, I've heard people say who drunk drove, where they'll say, I was the least drunk of anyone that I was there with. So it was good for me to be driving because I was the least drunk. And of course, if you want to combat that and you're talking to your kids, take an Uber, take a Lyft, you know what I mean? Call someone else. But I've seen people do these with the drunk driving. Does that kind of make sense? So I hope this cognitive dissonance theory makes sense to you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me, marydz@cameron.edu. Okay. And don't forget, this chapter is chock full of good information. So even though the video is a little shorter this week, you're going to spend that time reading the chapter much more carefully than some of the other chapters. All right, thank you. Goodbye.